Your phone doesn't ring the way it used to. You noticed it before anyone had to say anything. For most of your life, somebody needed something from you. Your opinion, your help, just you showing up. You always knew where you were supposed to be. Then, slowly, that changes. No single day marks it. Fewer calls. The kids have their own lives now. Work doesn't fill the week the way it did. The calendar has more open space than it used to. Nothing urgent. Nobody waiting on you today. You probably spent years wanting exactly this. More time. Fewer demands. Room to breathe. And sometimes it really does feel that good. But every so often, you catch yourself quietly, wondering something you never expected to ask at this point in your life. What am I supposed to do with all this freedom now? It's tempting to blame that on getting older. But plenty of people in their 60s and 70s feel completely steady, completely themselves. So maybe it isn't the years going by at all. Something else is changing underneath it. And once you see what it actually is, a few things you've been feeling lately might finally start to make sense. Here's what most people never really stop to notice. For most of your life, you didn't have to decide what mattered today. It was already decided for you. Monday showed up with a job already attached to it. When the kids were small, the morning had a shape before you even got out of bed. Breakfast, backpacks, the school run, whatever came next. Family needed things. The phone rang with people who expected an answer. Even the small stuff, the errands, the appointments, the calls you had to return, all of it gave your day a direction. You didn't have to ask yourself what today was for. Today already knew. Then, one stretch of years, that starts to fade. And here's the part that catches people off guard. It's not the shorter list that's hard. It's what happens after. You wake up and there's nowhere you have to be. Not today. You make your coffee and the morning has no shape to it. No deadline, no appointment, no one waiting. And for a moment, that feels exactly like the freedom you always wanted. You spent years saying you couldn't wait to slow down. Now you have. But then comes a strange kind of afternoon. Nothing's wrong. Nothing's urgent. And somehow, that's the part that feels unfamiliar. You've got the whole day in front of you, and you're not sure what to do with it. It's a strange thing to admit, even to yourself, that having nothing you have to do can feel harder than having too much. This isn't about becoming useless. It's not about being forgotten. It's something much more ordinary than that, and much harder to put into words. You can spend 30 years complaining about a full calendar, wishing for exactly one open afternoon. And then, when the calendar finally clears out for good, something unexpected happens. You miss it. Not the stress, not the deadlines, just the reason to get up and get moving. Deciding what matters when nobody's asking you to turns out to be a different kind of work, a quieter kind. Nobody sits you down before retirement and explains that freedom comes with its own kind of homework. Some people adjust to this almost right away. They find a project, a hobby, something of their own choosing, and the days start to feel full again, just full of different things. Others take longer. They still wake up early out of habit, still make coffee at the same time they always did, still look at the clock, but there's no meeting, no commute, no pickup, no appointment waiting on the other end of it. Nothing is wrong. But something feels different, and it's hard to explain exactly what. Most people land somewhere in between. Some days feel like freedom. Other days feel like a question they haven't answered yet. There's no single right way through this. Nobody hands you a manual for it. What used to happen automatically didn't fail you. It just isn't there anymore. And whatever comes next has to be something you build yourself, on purpose, instead of something that just shows up because somebody else needed you. So here's the real question underneath all of it. If the hard part isn't having less to do, if it's actually about creating something new to replace what used to appear on its own, what does that actually look like? What makes a day feel worth getting up for, once nobody's assigning you the task? That's a different question than most people expect to be asking in their 60s or 70s. But it might be the one that matters most. Your kids still love you. They still call. But the questions are different now. For most of your life, being counted on wasn't something you thought about. It just happened, over and over. Your kids needed a decision made. Your spouse needed you to handle something. Somebody at work needed your experience on a problem nobody else could quite solve. None of that felt like meaning at the time. It just felt like Tuesday. And when that starts to change, you don't always notice right away. Nothing has to go wrong for it to happen. Your kids don't stop loving you. They just stop calling to ask what you think, because somewhere in the last 20 years, they learned how to run their own lives. Your spouse doesn't stop needing you. They just handle more on their own now, because at some point, they had to. There's a version of this you might recognize. You reach for the phone to call one of your kids, and halfway through dialing, you realize you don't actually have a reason. Nothing's wrong. Nobody needs an answer. You just wanted to call. And that's fine. But it's different from how it used to be. When the phone rang because something needed you specifically. You might still get the family group text. You might still get invited to Sunday dinner. But you notice the questions have changed. They don't call because something needs fixing. They call to say hello. That difference is small. But you feel it. Here's what most people don't expect. It's not the responsibilities themselves you miss, not the deadlines, not the long list of things somebody needed from you. What you miss is quieter than that. It's the small, steady feeling that your presence mattered somewhere, today, to someone. That feeling used to come built in. You didn't have to look for it. It just arrived, wrapped inside everything else you were doing. And on paper, nothing looks wrong. Your family's still there. You're still invited, still loved. You're still part of things, just maybe not in the same seat you used to sit in. Watching your kids solve their own problems is actually a strange kind of proof. It means you did something right. You raised people who don't need to call their parent every time life gets complicated. That's supposed to feel like success. And it does, most of the time. But every so often that success comes with a small, quiet ache that nobody warns you about. It happens in small ways. A decision gets made, and you find out about it later. A problem comes up, and by the time you hear about it, it's already been handled. Nobody did anything wrong. Nobody left you out on purpose. It's just that things used to require your input, and now they don't. Not because you stopped mattering. Somewhere along the way, life just learned how to keep moving without checking with you first. And maybe that's the thing nobody ever taught you how to tell apart. Being loved and being needed are two different things. For most of your life, they were tangled up so tightly, you never had to tell them apart. Somebody can love you completely and still not need you the way they once did. Both can be true at the same time. That's not a contradiction most people expect to run into at this point in their lives. Nobody explains it ahead of time. You just arrive at it on your own, usually when you least expect it. So if the old ways of feeling useful aren't showing up as often as they used to, what's supposed to take their place? Nobody hands you a new one. There's no job posting for it. So where does someone start? Noticing the day is open is one thing. Filling it with something that's actually yours is a completely different problem. You got very good over the years at responding. Somebody called, you answered. Something broke, you fixed it. That's a real skill, built over decades without you ever trying to build it. But choosing something just for yourself, with nobody checking whether you got it right, that's a different muscle. And there's a decent chance it's one you've barely used. Walt found that out the hard way. Not dramatically, just quietly. You already know how the argument's going to end before it starts. Somebody brings something up, some old sore spot, and you can feel the whole shape of the next 10 minutes before you've said a word. where you'll dig in, where you'll let it go, how long it'll take you to come around. That's supposed to be a good thing. Mostly it is. There was a time when none of that was decided yet. You genuinely didn't know what pressure would pull out of you until it actually did. You found that out the hard way more than once, and each time you did, you learned something about the man underneath the one you thought you were. You wouldn't have called that comfortable. You definitely wouldn't have called it a gift. It turned into one anyway. That's the strange part nobody tells you. You'll be standing in the kitchen sometimes, half listening to somebody younger in the family go back and forth on some decision they can't land. A job, a relationship, something that feels enormous to them and genuinely might be. You watch them turn it over and over, and something in you responds that isn't quite what you'd expect. You're not wishing you were them. You're remembering a feeling instead. Not knowing had a texture to it. Once, you lived in it constantly, for years, without ever noticing it was even there. You'd nearly forgotten it existed until you watched somebody else standing inside it. There's a quieter version of the same thing, and it happens more often than the first one does. Somebody asks your opinion on something, and the answer's out of your mouth before they've finished the question. You're not discovering anything by answering. You already know what you think. You've known for years, maybe decades, and the knowing arrives so gradually you never noticed the day it finished arriving. At first, that sounds like exactly what you'd want at this point. Certainty, the right to stop guessing your way through your own life. But sit inside it a little longer, and something else shows up. For most of your adult life, some part of you stayed unfinished. Not by choice, exactly, it just was. You didn't know what kind of father you'd turn out to be until you'd already spent years being one. You didn't know what you'd do the day something actually tested you, instead of just imagining what you'd do. That unfinished quality cost you plenty along the way. It also gave your life a kind of forward lean. You got up some mornings, at least partly, because there was still more of you left to find. There's less left to find now. Not none. Less. And that might be closer to the real reason this particular stretch of years can feel stranger than people expect it to. It isn't the calendar. It isn't about who calls and who doesn't anymore. It's that the specific kind of not knowing that used to pull you through your own life has mostly run its course, and nobody warns you ahead of time that it's going quiet would feel like anything at all. You became somebody. You can look at that fact and feel something close to pride. You did all right, whatever else went wrong along the way. The man you turned out to be is somebody you can live inside without flinching, which is more than plenty of people can say. And you can still miss him, the version of you that hadn't landed yet, the one still finding out. Those two feelings don't cancel each other out. They just sit there together, quietly. And most people never expected they'd have to hold both at the same time. It isn't grief exactly. It's closer to standing in a house you built with your own hands, looking around at how finished it is, and noticing, for the first time, how quiet a finished house actually sounds. So if the question that used to pull you forward for most of your life, who am I going to turn out to be, has finally, quietly been answered, what's supposed to take its place? What is there left, at this point, to become curious about? Walt didn't answer that one right away. He'd already tried a few of the fast answers, a new hobby, a new project, some version of the old job wearing a different hat, and each one worked for a while and then quietly stopped working. Like a shirt that fits fine in the store and turns out wrong once you actually wear it around all day. So he did something smaller. One Saturday morning, no plan, he walked out to the garage and stood there looking at the truck. Not the one he drives now, the other one. A 74, half restored, sitting under a tarp in the back corner for going on 11 years. He'd bought it the year before things at the plant got busy in a way that never let up again. Got the engine about 2/3 apart, and then life did what it does, and the whole project just stopped, mid-sentence, and sat there. He used to walk past it and feel a flash of guilt. Lately, he'd stopped even feeling that. He pulled the tarp off for no better reason than the morning was open and he happened to be standing there. He wasn't deciding to finish it. He just wanted to look at it. Standing over the engine, it hit him that he genuinely didn't know if he could put it back together. Not the way he used to. When he worked on this truck the first time, he knew engines the way he knew his own name. Thousands of hours of it, decades of fixing things for a living. Now some of the pieces looked almost unfamiliar. He had to stop and think. Guess? Even. He hadn't guessed about much of anything in a long time. Most of his life he'd have told you the whole point was the opposite. Get good enough at something that you never had to guess. He had. That was most of what 31 years bought him. But standing there with a socket wrench in his hand, no real certainty he'd get the thing running. Something in him woke up that hadn't worked right in a while. Nobody needed that truck running. His wife had brought up selling it more than once. His son-in-law would have hauled the tarp off gladly, if asked. Nobody had assigned Walt this. Nobody would notice if he never touched it again. That was most of the difference, as far as he could tell. He worked on it 3 Saturdays before he mentioned it to anyone, not to hide it, just because there wasn't yet anything worth reporting. His wife found him in the garage past dinner one night, hands black to the wrist, a look on his face she hadn't seen in a while. She said she'd heat up his plate whenever he was ready, and went back inside. He noticed she didn't ask for an explanation. He noticed he was grateful for that more than he'd have said out loud. His daughter called around then. This one was different from the sink. She'd heard from her mother he was back on the truck and wanted to know how it was going. He talked for 20 minutes about compression rings and a carburetor he couldn't find locally. And somewhere in there he realized she wasn't asking because she needed anything from him. She was glad he had something he cared about again. No decision attached to it. She just wanted to know. He'd already figured out, in the months before this, that being loved and being needed were 2 different things, and it had stung some to sit with. What he hadn't noticed yet was the other side of that. Being loved without being needed wasn't a lesser thing. It was just a different shape than what he was used to. He'd spent decades being needed constantly, and hadn't always felt especially seen underneath it. Now people needed less from him, and somehow paid him more attention. It took closer to 4 months than 4 weeks. Whole Saturdays where nothing came together, and he set the wrench down angrier than when he'd picked it up. A couple of times he thought about quitting, going back to something with a guaranteed outcome. He didn't. Partly stubbornness, partly something he was only starting to recognize, that the not knowing was most of what he'd been after in the first place, whether he'd have said so at the start or not. The morning it finally turned over, nobody else was there. He'd half expected that. He stood a second after the engine caught, letting it run rough and loud in the closed garage, and didn't call anyone right away. He just stood there and listened to it. Then, he called his daughter. Not because anything needed fixing, because he wanted to be the one to tell her. He wouldn't have called it a new purpose. He'd have looked at you sideways if you had. It was smaller than that, whatever it was. Nobody assigned him the truck. Nobody was checking on it but him. He still has mornings when the garage door stays shut, and nothing in the day is asking anything of him. Some part of him still doesn't know what to do with those, and it probably never fully will. But something has shifted in how they feel. He stopped waiting for one of them to hand him a reason. Some days, he just walks out to the garage to see what's next. If there's something like that in your own garage, or closet, or the back of a drawer, something half-finished you gave up on for reasons that made sense at the time, I'd like to know what it is. You don't need a big answer. Just tell me what it is. The truck's parked out front now. Walt still hasn't decided whether he's selling it or keeping it. Some mornings he just stands in the driveway and looks at it a while before he goes back inside.